You've been calling yourself lazy for years, maybe decades. Every time you sat on the couch instead of starting the thing you said you'd start, that word showed up in your head like a verdict. Lazy. Like it was the final truth about who you are. But what if that word was never accurate? What if your brain was doing something else entirely? Something that had nothing to do with effort, willpower, or how much you actually care. Here's what the science actually shows, and it will completely change the way you see yourself. When your brain detects a threat, any kind of threat, it activates a survival response. You already know about fight or flight, but there's a third response that almost nobody talks about. It's called the freeze response, and your nervous system triggers it not just when a physical predator is nearby. It triggers it when the threat is emotional, when the task in front of you feels overwhelming, when failure feels humiliating, when starting something means risking something. The freeze response is not laziness. It is your nervous system's most ancient protection. Dr. Stephen Porges spent decades studying the autonomic nervous system. His research, known as polyvagal theory, changed the way scientists understand the human stress response. Porges showed that the freeze state is not chosen. It is not a moral failing. It is a physiological event, a shutdown that happens below the level of conscious thought. Your body reads the environment as unsafe and it pulls you into stillness, not because you are weak, because you are wired to survive. So the next time you cannot move toward a task, the next time you sit frozen in front of your laptop, or you lie in bed knowing you should get up, that is not a character flaw. That is your oldest brain doing its job. But why does a work task, or a phone call, or a blank page feel like a threat? This is where it gets even more important. Your nervous system does not distinguish between a lion in the grass and a looming deadline that could expose your incompetence. Both get processed through the same ancient survival hardware. And because most of us grew up in environments where performance was tied to love, approval, or safety, where failing at something meant something painful happened, our brains learned to mark certain kinds of effort as dangerous. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, whose research on trauma and the body has reshaped modern psychology, explains it this way. The body keeps the score. Your nervous system stores old experiences as patterns, and those patterns run constantly in the background, influencing what feels safe and what feels threatening, long after the original danger is gone. You are not lazy. You are running an old program. And here is what makes this even more complicated. When your nervous system is in freeze, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and rational thought, goes partially offline, which means you cannot think your way out of freeze. You cannot willpower your way through it. Every self-help advice column that tells you to just push through, to discipline yourself harder, to set better goals, that advice is aimed at the wrong part of your brain. Telling a frozen nervous system to just try harder is like yelling at a car with no fuel to drive faster. So what actually works? Dr. Peter Levine, a researcher who spent over 45 years studying how the body processes and releases stress, found something remarkable. Animals in the wild regularly shake, tremble, or move after a freeze response. That physical movement is how they discharge the survival energy their body activated. It is how they complete the stress cycle. And then they go back to being normal animals again. Humans, somewhere along the way, learn to suppress that process. We hold still. We try to think through the discomfort. We criticize ourselves for feeling it at all. And so the energy stays stored, and the freeze keeps coming back. What Levine's work suggests is that the path out of chronic freeze is not cognitive, it is physical. Short bursts of movement, walking, stretching, shaking your hands, even slow, deep breathing, begin to signal to your nervous system that the threat has passed, that it is safe to come back online, that you can function again. This is not metaphor. This is neurobiology. Now, consider what this means for every story you have told yourself about being lazy. Every time you froze at the edge of something hard, something uncertain, something that carried the risk of failure or judgment, that was not laziness. That was a nervous system response to perceived threat. That was a brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. That was protection. And you punished yourself for it. You added shame on top of freeze, which it turns out deepens the freeze, because shame is itself a threat signal. Dr. Brené Brown's research on shame and vulnerability shows that shame is one of the most physiologically activating emotions a human being can experience. It raises cortisol. It activates the same threat circuits. It makes the freeze more complete. Every harsh word you turned on yourself for not being productive enough, every "what is wrong with me," was not motivating you. It was making the problem worse. This is the counterintuitive truth. Self-criticism is not discipline. It is another threat. And your nervous system responds to it the same way it responds to every threat, by shutting down. The people who move consistently and calmly through hard tasks are not harder on themselves. They are safer with themselves. They have learned, consciously or not, to create internal conditions where effort feels less like danger. James Clear, whose research on habit formation explored exactly this dynamic, found that sustainable behavior change requires reducing friction at every level. Not just logistical friction, emotional friction. The internal story that makes starting feel threatening. When you lower the perceived threat, when you make the first step genuinely small, genuinely safe, the nervous system does not need to freeze, and momentum becomes possible. So what do you do with all of this today? The next time you feel frozen, the next time you cannot make yourself start, do not reach for shame. Do not call yourself lazy. Instead, try something different. Ask your body what it needs before it can feel safe. Sometimes that is movement. Sometimes that is a smaller version of the task. Sometimes it is simply acknowledging out loud that this feels threatening, even if it looks ordinary from the outside. You are not diagnosing yourself. You are not making excuses. You are working with your nervous system instead of against it. Because here is the thing about the freeze response. It is not your enemy. It was never your enemy. It has been your brain's attempt to protect you from pain it learned to fear. And the moment you stop fighting it, the moment you meet it with curiosity instead of contempt, it begins to loosen its grip. You were not lazy all those years. Your nervous system was sounding an alarm, and you just never knew what it was saying. Now you do. And that is not a small thing. That is the beginning of something different. The next time you sit there, unable to move, unable to start, feeling like there is something fundamentally broken in you, remember this. That stillness is a signal, not of your weakness, but of a nervous system trying, the only way it knows how, to keep you safe. You were never lazy. You were always trying to survive.